A large tract of land along the Mackinaw River, too rugged for farming, is now part of a new conservation area.
So they remain intact with this amazing abundance of plant diversity.
You'll go to the Devil's Backbone just ahead on WGLT's Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. Also on today's show, a visual and musical artist shows how art can offer healing, especially for young people who've dealt with the loss of family members in prison.
How do we interact with the youth? Do we condemn that kid because of a loved one's experience?
And an Illinois consumer watchdog says having a lot of new energy options is good, but buyer beware.
There's a lot of onus on consumers now to figure out what works for them
and what may be a scam. Those stories after a Bloomington Normal News update. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington Normal Audiology. Hear My Story continues with local patient Paul Brandt.
So I just went without them for all those years. I talked to somebody who had recently gotten hearing aids and talked about the fact that they were connected to the TV. And so that kind of prompted me to try it again.
Paul's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University in Normal, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. A Central Illinois conservation group has acquired one of the few remaining remnants of hill prairie habitat in Illinois. In this interview with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker, Matt Fraker of the Parklands Foundation says the addition is called the Devil's Backbone. That's an old-time name for the jagged geography of the 55 acres near the Mackinaw River in Woodford County.
In the middle of this property is the spine of ground, sort of geologically abnormal, that shoots off with a huge ravine to its south and then the river to its north. And you're about 100 feet above both on the spine of ground. And on this ground is one of the most intact, diverse hill prairies that we have in our McLean County, Woodford County, Mackinaw River Valley. These hill prairies didn't get farmed, they didn't get grazed, because they're sort of in these remote, hard-to-get areas. Cattle can't get out there to graze. There's no reason to do anything agriculturally with them. So they remain intact with this amazing abundance of plant diversity, and that makes them incredibly high quality. And the Devil's Backbone has been a target of ours for a very long time.
Is it really intact, though? I mean, plants that were not native spread beyond the wave of Western settlement during the settlement period by 10 to 20 miles in advance of where the actual settlers were plunking down roots. So they've got non-native all around. Are they still native?
This spine has a little bit of one of our non-natives that pops up every once in a while. But the soil is really rough, so it's not weed-friendly soil. So that has also helped keep the invasives out of that area. It also helps that this beautiful, established old-growth oak timber that spills down into where you walk off into the spine, it's mostly white oak. The landowners that we've been negotiating with for years on this transaction actually went in and did their own restoration on this property, probably in the early 2000s, and really made it healthy, cleaned it up, opened it up, and that really helped with the invasives like the honeysuckle and the autumn olive. And in terms of the actual Devil's Backbone itself, there's really been a minimal invasive component. Now, there has been some overgrowth of natives that would normally have been in health check by fires and that kind of thing. But they're natives, and we can go in there and manage those.
What other native plants are really cool to think about preserving and fostering?
Some of our favorites are blazing star, for instance, Laetris, a beautiful prairie plant, pretty conservative. Again, our soils have been sort of pro some of these prairie plants because of these high elevation clay soils. So we have blazing star, we have northern dropseed on the backbone, which is a really tough to find native grass. And the grasses are important too. Those are native seeds, food for our native insects. All of these native plants are native pollinators. They know how to use them. They're great for our native pollinator habitat, which is in sort of critical decline right now. We have several species of orchid throughout the Mackinac Bluffs corridor. And that's a tough plant to have. And I think we have 3, 4, 5, maybe six different species of orchids throughout the corridor. So it's really a special, special place. It's just remote and it's just kind of wild out there.
Gotta ask, this is not the only devil's backbone out there. There's one in Arkansas, one in Mississippi, probably others. What does that mean?
Oh, the devil's backbone is sort of I guess you'd call it an old-timer's description of the geological formation because it's such a weird spine. Most bluff points fade and fall to the river, and there may be a steep fall. Maybe you get to the end of the bluff point and it's a steep fall. The devil's backbone it begins to fall and then it rises up to this point that's almost maybe the highest point on the backbone before it plummets down to where the ravine meets the river. Geologically, it's an extremely unusual formation, and they gave it the name the devil's backbone just because of how it's the spine that kind of makes no geological sense.
Was it glaciated?
This area was glaciated, and I think it contributed quite a bit to why it's such rough ground out there. The glaciers pushed all this stuff and made this really rough morainal-type area.
This is Sound Ideas. I'm Charlie Schlenker. We're talking with Matt Fraker about the acquisition of the Devil's Backbone for the Parklands Foundation. What's the difference in the kind of flora you find in a hill prairie versus a savanna prairie or flat prairie?
To some extent, you might see some plants that are going to be preferential to a hill prairie than to a flat prairie. Not so much. Now, there's a tree that is the chinkapin oak, which is our least common oak in central Illinois. It's a real witchy looking oak, a beautiful oak that loves these steep bluffs that are next to the Mackinaw River. And one of the best groves of chinkapin oak is on the North Chinkapin Oak Preserve, coming in from the Kappa Road there before it curves north towards Secor. There's a beautiful grove of chinkapin oaks, and chinkapin oaks are really fond of these steep riverine bluffs, and there's a lot of beautiful chinkapin oaks on the Devil's Backbone.
You mentioned 3 or 4 other hill prairie remnants in the Mackinaw Valley, that some of which are controlled by the Parklands Foundation. Are there hill prairie remnants elsewhere in Illinois?
Oh, yes. You can find hill prairies. Mason County's kind of legendary for its sand, the big sand blowouts from the glaciers. They've got sand prairies there, and they've got a really interesting flora fauna that's sort of unique because of that sand ecosystem. It's sort of a group of creatures and plants that you might find a little bit farther to the southwest than you would normally find in central Illinois. So the hill prairies can be found almost anywhere you have really good rivers with rough habitat. And again, we have another one just downstream that's with 2 excellent land stewards who love it. They take care of it, and so it's in good hands right now. And again, just a sidebar, when we can find private interests to do our conservation forests, that's a huge part of the mission. Is trying to leverage private landowners towards doing the same thing we're trying to accomplish, which we have done with some success.
Not all Parklands Foundation property is open to the public. Some is a little vulnerable, and you wouldn't want people tromping around in it and carrying seeds or whatever on their boots. What are you going to do with this property? We
are definitely going to have to limit access to this property because of the fragile nature of the backbone. The backbone is subject to erosion during high storm events, and just as you mentioned, tromping in and out of this location. This is a location that we will probably use mostly for research, restoration, perhaps a seed bank for some of our other restorations, and education. We definitely want to get people to this wonderful location, but it will certainly be controlled access just because of the fragile nature of the whole thing. Just has a fragile existence. We have so much other acreage. I mean, the entire corridor is about 1,500 acres of protected ground, and we have a lot of places for people to be able to walk and explore and see prairie restorations and see everything else. But this will be a limited access property for some time.
What kind of research are you looking to do there?
So Roger Anderson, who's sort of the grand person of all things Illinois Savannah, did a major plant inventory out there. Man, this was a long time ago. And it would be very fascinating if we could go back in there and do another plant inventory. Now, they did recently do, in the last 5 years, I believe, the INAI is the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory. And what they do is they go find the highest quality pieces of conservation ground that Illinois has. And these can be postage stamp sized. If the value's there, if there's a plant there that's worth it, then the INAI designation is a really big deal. And the Devil's Backbone, they came out and they did their inventory and determined that this was an INAI site for Illinois, which is a really big deal. So comparing the plant communities that Roger Anderson had, we have that survey, and comparing to the INAI, and then seeing if we're losing certain plants because of the overgrowth and the lack of management. And again, management is clearing and fire. Those are our two big weapons to get the native understory to recover, is getting the sun to it and then burning it off.
That's Matt Fraker of the Parklands Foundation, a conservation group that manages more than 1,500 acres of preserve in McLean and Woodford counties along the Mackinaw River. Fraker spoke with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker. Coming up tomorrow on Sound Ideas, you'll learn that more first aid training is now available in McLean County to help someone in a mental health crisis. Stories and conversations around Bloomington, Normal, and McLean County. This is WGLT's Sound Ideas. Art is widely accepted as a form of expression. For Antonio Burton, it's more than that. It's a language he uses to convey messages about mass incarceration. On Saturday, Burton, who also goes by the name of Tony Picasso, plans to share his form of art therapy at the McLean County Arts Center in Bloomington. WGLT's Melissa Ellen spoke with Burton about his work and his plans for Saturday.
I practice in a lot of medias. One in particular that got the name buzzing is, of course, fine art of painting. Then I do music, and then I also do video as well.
Where does the name Tony Picasso come from?
Crazy. Tony Picasso actually came from one of my fellow musicians. We had just got done performing, and I told him, like, yo, I don't want to be a rapper anymore. I think I'm going to go full-time art. And he was like, well, you already Picasso anyway with the words, so now you could just be Tony Picasso. And it kind of came from that.
I know that you're from Decatur.
Yes.
But you are here and chatting with me because you do have a connection, at least, to McLean County, which
Correct.
is that you're going to be doing mass incarceration, healing through community and art.
Yes.
So tell me about that. Obviously, it's focusing on incarceration. Yeah. What's it going to be like?
Yeah, got it. So growing up, I had a background with relatives, man, just in and out of jail. And there came an opportunity like about 3-4 years ago where Illinois Humanities had a grant, and I applied for the grant, and then it was one of those things where I can use all my gifts in one. And with the topic of mass incarceration being something that I've always been an advocate for, it created this platform that we are visiting now. With that was birthed the creation of Bars and Gates, Copy Paste Delete, and it's me telling the side of the youth. And nobody ever talks about how mass incarceration affects the youth. And then on side that, how do we interact with the youth? Do we condemn that kid because of a loved one's experience? Or do we kind of take in consideration what this kid is dealing with and be one of those people that see that kid in a different light so they can be a benefit to society, whether it's deeming them as, a throwaway or something like that, And it's just me putting in perspective what it's like to be that kid, but what it's like to be that kid with positive affirmations as well.
Another topic for you that's come up is art therapy. And
yes.
I think this, talking about art, talking about healing, potentially healing through art.
Correct.
This is me sort of, putting these thoughts out there, but I'd love to hear from you about how you use art therapy, how you define it.
Let's start with the definition first. So for the definition for me, and this is the Tony Picasso definition of art therapy, it's just you imitating your emotions, right? So a lot of times as an angry kid, I would act out in a physical manner. Well, that physical manner, instead of it being aggression, I turned and translated that aggression in art. And the best way to put this is art became my way to create this world. So whereas somebody do something to you and you can't, lash out right away. Well, when I would go get in time out or get that isolated time, that's where I got to create this world where I could work out those problems. So if I'm aggressive, I'll scribble. If it's calm, I'll make water. If I'm happy, then I'll choose a color that I associate with happy, like yellow or red. And by identifying those things for me, now I've created this language that I can use to communicate in a visual way versus, a verbal way. And now with the art therapy component and what I do with going talking to kids and things like that, I let them create their own glossary. So if they wanted to use red for this emotion or blue for this emotion or a straight line or a jagged lead for those emotion, we take those elements and relate it to an emotion. And this kid now has a way to articulate themselves in an artistic way.
Is that what is going to be the topic of conversation at this event? What kind of is that going to look like?
A little bit. And the reason I'm saying a little bit because it's more of a collaboration. I'll be coming there, giving my spiel and then sharing my story and then using some of the art that I created for that content to show that. Then we'll break out into small workshops with different community partners who are actually practicing art therapy. So this time I don't have to do it all by myself.
Those are all the questions I had, but was there anything else at all that you wanted to add?
I would just say this, being a person that's from Decatur, Illinois, having an opportunity when I was a young kid coming to Illinois State University, being a part of the SciMass program. I don't know if you know what that STEM program is, but in middle school, I got to come here, have a college experience, the campus grounds, stay in the dorms, and do STEM programs. And now full circle seeing me as an adult come back and then having this actual experience that we're going to do at the Arts Council here, it's like full circle. So I'm happy to be back in this community, happy to be back in the Midwest, and I'm just happy for the opportunity God has given me.
That was Antonio Burton, a.k.a. Tony Picasso, speaking with WGLT's Melissa Ellen. Mass Incarceration, Healing Through Community and Art with Tony Picasso is Saturday afternoon from 3 to 5 at the McLean County Arts Center in Bloomington. Melissa Ellen covers mental health as a Report for America Corps member. Report for America places journalists in local newsrooms across the nation to cover underreported topics.
Support for WGLT mental health coverage comes from Report for America and Chestnut Health Systems, caring for the community's physical and mental health and celebrating 50 years of service.
This is Sound Ideas on WGLT. Sarah Moskowitz is the new executive director of the Citizens Utility Board. That's an advocacy organization for Illinois consumers. Moskowitz tells correspondent Steve Tarter from sister station WCBU she is no stranger to CUB or the issues Illinoisans are facing when it comes to utility bills.
It is true that Illinois utility customers are faced with an overwhelming number of options when it comes to their utility bills. CUB was my first job out of college over 23 years ago. And back then, we didn't have any programs to provide rebates for energy efficiency. There wasn't any choice in the gas or electric markets. There weren't any state incentives for rooftop solar or community solar. Now we have so many options. It's really great in a lot of ways, but it also presents a great challenge because consumers, there's a lot of onus on consumers now to figure out what works for them and what programs are legitimate and what things could end up costing them more. And so that's a lot of what CUB has been doing as these options grow, is working one-on-one with utility customers across the state to help them decode all of the options out there and figure out what actually works for them.
I know that in Central Illinois, Ameren is the major utility, and they had put in a rate increase request that was turned down. What can we expect now from Ameren? Is that are they going to come back with something, or what's your reading there?
Well, I've learned that the utilities always come back. It's never done.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting late last year what the Illinois Commerce Commission, or ICC, did. The ICC being the state entity that oversees the regulated utilities. So when Ameren wants to increase the charges, it charges to their customers for delivering the gas or electricity to your home, they have to go to the Illinois Commerce Commission to get approval for that. Legislation that passed a few years ago require the electric utilities to come to the Illinois Commerce Commission with a 4-year plan for upgrades that they're going to make to their energy distribution systems to kind of account for the increase in solar, the increase in electric vehicles, the increase in possibly for heating with electricity in homes. We need to kind of plan for a grid of the future to kind of help with the clean energy transition. And they're coming back, and they've been told they need to come back. And then, so CUB and all the other entities intervening in these cases are at it again. And we'll see how this all plays out in the next few months.
One of the things you mentioned, we're talking with Sarah Moskowitz, the executive director of CUB, Citizens Utility Board in Illinois. It was the number of choices that a consumer now is faced with, and I think this was in your the one of the pieces that CUB put out, that the market is littered with ripoffs. I think that's a quote when it talks about alternative suppliers. In other words, other than your utility, some other business that can provide your energy. The market is littered with ripoffs. Why? First of all, why is that? And secondly, how does one get through that?
Here in Illinois, we are what they call a restructured state. And so our distribution electric utilities, the state regulated utilities like Ameren, Illinois, are not allowed to own generation. They only make money off of delivering the juice to your house, whereas the actual electricity itself is procured on our behalf by Ameren in conjunction with state goals. But it also has allowed for these alternative energy suppliers to enter the market. And so now residential customers across the state have the option of signing up with one of these other companies, which sounds like that could be great. Generally competitive markets, shopping around should be good for folks. But unfortunately, that's not really what we've seen in the state of Illinois. For decades now, we've seen rampant contract fraud being perpetrated by some of the alternative energy suppliers. Unfortunately, these guys are still out there. My colleague just emailed me, said he saw someone from an alternative energy supplier going up and down the aisles at Walmart offering people gift cards if they signed up with his company.
That was Citizens Utility Board Executive Director Sarah Moskowitz speaking with WCBU's Steve Tarter. Moskowitz says if you feel an energy supplier is trying to rip you off, CUB takes complaints and questions from utility customers on its consumer hotline. That is 1-800-669-5556. And if you need that number again, you can go to the web version of this story. And that's Sound Ideas today. WGLT's news magazine is made possible in part by Bloomington Normal Audiology. I'm John Norton. Story help today came from WGLT's Charlie Schlenker and Melissa Ellen, and from WCBU's Steve Tarter. Ryan Toohey edits Sound Ideas, and this is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.